Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, regulatory landscape, and capital markets. This segment is presented by Charles Schwab. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site, we have Mark Gilbert, co-founder and CEO of Zocks, as well as Julien Bonnay, partner and U.S. head of technology and cybersecurity at Capco. We're here to discuss new privacy and data protection requirements affecting wealth management firms and their clients. It is great to have the both of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks, and of course, everything centered around AI. And Mark, AI is nothing new in financial services, but it seems to be at the forefront in the space right now.
Yeah, things have changed a lot in the last few years. I think a lot of people view ChatGPT launching as kind of a seminal event there. And I think what we're seeing is AI has moved from what we think of as more of a kind of predictive technology, really to help people trade and model portfolios, to really starting to go through the entire client experience. Like now with LLMs, we can actually listen to and make sense of conversations like this, and it's actually really helping accelerate the industry. But as you know, like there's a lot of different considerations that really have to be thought through with AI in there. But the spread is extremely fast right now.
Yeah, it certainly is. And Julien, this technology, as it becomes more advanced and more complex, it just adds more layers to the internal and external processes of financial firms.
Yeah, definitely adding quite a lot of processes. The high net worth clients are definitely expecting a lot of services. First of all, personalized services, but also being a one-stop shop for their experience. So you've got obviously the traditional wealth services, but also tax, estate, and even cybersecurity or aviation or travel here that are supported by AI solutions.
Yeah, and when you think about the solutions, how can the industry strike a balance between the potential that AI has and then privacy obligations that come with handling sensitive financial data and information?
That's a great question, Jill. I think the privacy should be a design feature of any AI solution more than being an afterthought. There are four things to keep in mind. One is to be very transparent and have a clear business purpose when you develop an AI solution. That means you've got a business purpose and you bind the models towards very specific use cases. Two, you need to minimize the sensitivity of the data and making sure that you use technologies such as synthetic data, tokenized, masked data to reduce the amount of identifiable data that is being used. Three, controlled environment. I think this is key. No one should ever put personal client information on public models. They should put that on private models and secure these private models. And last but not least, I spoke a bit about transparency and consent. The clients need to receive very clear, plain English disclosures, which is important, as well as having the opportunity to decline or accept the training of the model using their own data.
Yeah, and AI systems can't come at the expense of client transparency and privacy controls.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've seen some of our top advisors, we were talking about view transparency as like a benefit, right? Like it's actually it's a value add for them and their clients as they look at it. And I think as you look at these systems, just as Julien said, the first thing is you need to understand what you want it to do. Like, what do you want to get out of this thing? Because I think just kind of playing for playing's sake can be a little risky. But once you get into that, you need all of these layers of transparency, like starting with the client so they know what's happening and what's going on. And that should be value add for you because you can offer them more services. But then also know throughout these systems, do you control the data? Like very specifically, can you erase the data if a client doesn't want their data in there or something went in there? And that's always important and always been important. I think it's becoming more and more important with like increasing regulation changes like GDPR being kind of an obvious one there, but you're seeing it in California and other spots. And then with AI, the other kind of key piece of this is if someone is training with your data, you can't really erase it anymore. Like it's essentially woven into that model. And so you need to be very thoughtful on, where is the data? Do you fully control it? And can frankly, you pull it out? Because otherwise, if it gets into kind of a training system or something that's more broadly out of your control, it's gone kind of at that point, unfortunately.
It's interesting because as the both of you are talking, I'm like, this sounds very GDPR and CCPA-esque, right? When you start using language with explicit opt-in, right? And I think, consumers particularly, you just want to hit yes so you can get to where you need to go. Or some of the language is dense even though it's not supposed to be legalese. And I think to your point, it's going to become a competitive advantage to have data governance and cyber first models in place.
Yeah, 100%. Like we see that where, like you can put a large legal contracts and everything in front of someone and they may click through it or whatever else, but you really need, especially for people working directly with clients, to be able to, in plain English, describe exactly like, do we control the data or not? Where is this going and how long are we going to hold this for? And frankly, why are we using it, right? And then I think throughout the enterprise, you need to make sure you're only using it for those reasons, right? Like that starts with policy, but also starts with actions and doing all of these things. It's really important.
So Julien, when you think about accountability for data across the entire organization, what does that look like?
I think accountability is more than a document. It's really a chain of trust, starting from the CEO down the line. So the CEO really needs to set the tone, define what responsible data use is. Then obviously the team working with the CEO, thinking about the CISO or the chief data officer, need to define the policies and the level of enforcement that will go alongside data protection and data privacy. Thinking about the advisor who's really fronting the end client, the advisor has a very specific role to make sure he or she collects really the information that is actually needed to deliver the services and not skew the use of data for non-approved services, thinking about marketing material or trying to find or sell new products. Last but not least, operations are here. They're here for the day-to-day. They need to enforce least privilege access. They need to do continuous monitoring and, worst case, be able to manage an incident.
Right. Well, because it's not, when it comes to data governance, when it comes to cybersecurity policy, it's not a set and forget type of exercise, right? The market is evolving so rapidly, and meanwhile, regulation may not be, but that doesn't mean you can just forget about data protection.
You cannot forget, and the regulatory point is a key one. Even for the SEC withdrew a broader cybersecurity rule that may come back in effect, by the way. Regulation SP is here with expected enforcement date of end of the year for the biggest firms. And there are already a number of expectations being set around incident response, about notification of breaches, and around the monitoring or overseeing the vendors where the data can transit from and to.
Yeah, I mean, that's really where a lot of your vulnerabilities could lie, right, is outside of the org.
Yeah, absolutely, and unfortunately it's even more complicated, or can be, where you may have vendors, right, that you're using, and they will also use vendors, and so you need to go kind of follow that chain, if you will, and understand policies, like what you may be working with a vendor that may have your great intentions in mind for you, but if they're also then working with one or two other vendors, like they all have to, frankly, follow whatever principles and goals you have, and I think from what we've seen, you generally want people who are pretty focused on the industry, because it does have unique privacy and compliance requirements to it.
Yeah, I mean, it just can't be a checklist in today's day and age, right? I mean, even our financial privacy laws are relatively antiquated as it relates to, it's physical paper that that checklist is for. And, with today's modern digital economy, there are some gaps there.
Yeah, and exactly as Julien was saying, I think there is like the regulatory and the laws, and that's important. I think if you're running a very, like what I would say, tight ship or thoughtful about it, it's frankly fairly easy, or much easier to deal with any regulatory changes because you have what you need. But also remember, like for most advisors, I'd say almost every advisor, the trust with the client is the most critical piece. And so even if they're not breaking a law, but the client loses trust or feels like data that they've given them is used in some way that they wouldn't expect or want, that's hugely bad for them, right? Like that's a huge problem, and that's why they really need to get a clear understanding and really start to, as we've seen, again, some top people use it really as a differentiator and advantage to be more clear on transparency, more clear around security, how the data is monitored, processed, and audited.
Julien, let's talk about the difference between cybersecurity and data protection, because there are some nuances there.
Yeah, and I believe the industry usually confuses a bit cybersecurity with data protection. Most of the firms I know have a strong, what I would call perimeter security. So they've got multi-factor authentication, they've got firewalls, they've got endpoint detection. That covers very well the security piece. On the privacy or on the data protection, the point is really to understand where your data resides inside the organization, but most often outside of the organization, and who can access it. And it's usually where it's a bit more complex to handle. So the industry is moving towards that direction. There's about 60% of the IIAs that are using some type of data lineage, data privacy tools, but there's still a long way to go to catch up the level of maturity that is now there from a cybersecurity standpoint.
I also think too, with the introduction of these generative AI tools, it could even be that there was no malintent, but perhaps by accident you input confidential data trying to run a scenario through a generative AI platform. So, you know, to your point earlier, it has to be a complete culture shift, because everyone is on the data team these days.
Complete culture shift. Everyone is data. Data is everywhere. That's why being a bit forward-looking, or at least with industry leaders, you see a lot of mapping of the data flows to really understand where the data resides, but where it is going, and putting more controls, more continuous monitoring about where the data is and who's using it really.
Yeah, and I mean, continuous monitoring is a big topic in the compliance space right now. I think, you know, as firms are trying to understand what their responsibilities are going to be as this environment evolves.
Yeah, it's like just given the changes you were saying, right? Things are moving very quickly. So I think understanding, you know, just your vendors, what's there, and as Julien was mentioning, getting more thoughtful on data. Like we see, I would say, better firms categorizing data, right? Like what is it? What, you know, like what's extremely confidential versus not? What's the use of it, right? So if it's used for one thing, it doesn't get repurposed for another piece. That frankly also makes it a lot easier as you're looking at new tools and new systems to understand what impact is this going to have. And gives you the ability to frankly be more agile, but you do need to do a little bit of that groundwork and just start to understand what data do you have on your clients and like where is it and what it's getting used for.
See, and I think that's a great point that the industry is learning about data minimization, because I think at the outset, November 2022, when ChatGPT hit the scene, it's part of our vernacular now, that internal, external facing products were just thrown at the wall because of the competitive landscape. And I think perhaps now we're starting to see some of those gaps and vulnerabilities emerge.
Oh yeah, and I think that comes out of two different aspects. Like one is there's a lot of things that were frankly not digitized very much before. So again, with ChatGPT and like, you know, as you're having client conversations, you're getting this data that's very personal for clients, right? Like around their family, around their goals and concerns and all of that. And that just wasn't frankly digitized, or if it was like a little note in a CRM system. That's now there, right? And that needs to get managed and understood. Plus, you know, all of the data that's always been very private around, you know, like their finances, everything that's going on. And again, the uses for those are very different. And you just have to be very thoughtful about what systems are storing what, why they're storing it, and frankly, who has access to it for what uses.
And that's a great point, because part of the challenge is operating in silos as well and not being able to get that holistic view, particularly when it comes to cybersecurity. But not everyone has to have access to every single piece of data.
Not everyone needs to have access, so there's really this concept of least privileged access that is very, very important. I think the technology is advancing also quite a bit. You were mentioning Gen AI solutions. There are more and more solutions in place now to really filter, normalize, synthesize the data that is going into the Gen AI pipeline. So there's also a goal to enforce and to use this new technology that is available to us to ensure we don't rely exclusively on humans. That is usually the weakest link in any organizations, but rely on technology to really sanction what data can go where.
Are you seeing, as people are evolving their data governance practices and policies, modeling it more after GDPR or CCPA as an example, to make sure that they're covering the bases?
They're definitely covering the bases. I think GDPR, CCPA move the needle if you're thinking about global companies and There are other regulations in Europe, in Asia that is doing that. There's really a need to catalog, identify where your data is, as Mark was mentioning earlier, to really understand the level of sensitivity and the level of privacy you want to apply to this set of data.
Are you seeing the same trend as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the larger firms, anyone that's dealing internationally is very aware. We get those requests all the time. And then as they go down to the smaller shops, it's probably a little bit more new for them, but we see requests for that. The other big aspect for us is like just geofencing, like physically in what jurisdiction is your data in, where is it getting processed? I think the other thing that's changed is, I think people used to think it primarily as a data storage, like, where is your data stored and what is it? These AI systems now are processing very, private data and very important data, and so even where is that processing going on and how secure is that processing is also very important.
All right, appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.